Alright, hello everybody, Friendly Red here, bringing you another recommendation. The Nintendo Switch 2 has been out for a little over a month now, and I figured it was time to finally sit down and share my thoughts on the new system. Working on all the news peruse videos for the various gaming announcement showcases for June, alongside the July 2025 RERE's radar, meant that I wasn't quite able to get any earlier content out on the system, but I suppose it may have been for the best really. I've been able to have a good amount of time with the system, which should hopefully mean I can give a pretty concise and detailed explanation on everything I want to discuss. The hardware, software, backwards compatibility, any quirks or gripes I have with it, and ultimately, why I do in fact recommend the Nintendo Switch 2. So, with the prelude complete, let's get into the Switch 2 discussion. I figure it's best to start by first talking about the hardware itself. Shocking, I know. Now, I'm not going to go into every single tiny little detail and technical specification about the system, but rather just cover the main talking points, and how they compare to the original Nintendo Switch, Switch OLED, and the numerous PC handhelds that are oh so popular right now. The Nintendo Switch 2 has a 7.9-inch 1080p LCD display, with support for HDR and VRR up to 120Hz, meaning supported games could hit a potential maximum of 120 frames per second. And now, it'll probably be pretty rare to see a lot of games hitting such high frame rates, but it's no doubt a really great feature to have supported, and it also allows the Switch 2 to support 40 FPS modes in games, like we currently see in the Switch 2 version of Cyberpunk 2077. As for the screen type, it's a bit of a mixed bag here really. I'm very much a proponent of OLED displays, so coming from the Switch OLED to Switch 2, it's certainly a bit of a downgrade in some regards, and of course better in others. You don't get the same punchy colors, better motion clarity, and perfect black levels that OLED offers, but in exchange you are getting a slightly larger, sharper display with more capabilities when it comes to how games will run and display on it. If you're coming from an original Switch, or especially a Switch Lite, I think it's overall going to be an upgrade in every regard. And thankfully, despite remaining an LCD screen like those original Switch units, the one on the Switch 2 is a much higher quality one. So while it's still not quite the same jump you might have seen going from a Switch to a Switch OLED or Steam Deck OLED, it's still an appreciably better display. Speaking on the Steam Deck though, I suppose this is a good place to talk about size and weight. While the Switch 2 does maintain the same thickness as the original Switch, the larger display and controllers does have it lean more firmly into the PC handheld space. By that, I mean it's certainly starting to stretch the idea of what exactly it means to be a compact, handheld gaming device. Don't misunderstand, the Switch 2 is certainly still very portable and easy to use on the go, and I think we're all pretty used to our portable devices having larger and larger screens each and every year, but just know that you may be in for an adjustment period if you didn't already own, say, a Switch OLED, which was much closer to the Switch 2 screen size, sitting right at 7 inches. Overall, not quite as hefty as something like the Steam Deck, ROG Ally, or Lenovo Legion Go, but certainly a bit larger and heavier than the original family of Switch consoles. Before I give my overall personal thoughts on the hardware, there's a few other points I think are worth mentioning real quick. Much of the other physical features of the Switch 2 mimic what we saw on the original Switch, just with minor tweaks and upgrades to better fit the here and now. Switch 2 has an adjustable kickstand for using the system in tabletop mode, which is thankfully much more like the kickstand on the Switch OLED, and not the original Switch. It's got a slot for physical Switch and Switch 2 game cards, a microSD Express slot, upgraded from the standard microSD found on OG Switch, for adding more storage on top of the included 256GB in the system, and 2 USB-C ports, one on both the top and bottom of the system. For those of you who want to charge the system while in tabletop mode, rejoice! You no longer have to carry around a silly accessory that Nintendo had to make because of a design oversight on Switch 1. The dock for using the system on a larger display is also mostly the same as what we've had before, but again, with some minor tweaks and upgrades. The LAN/Ethernet port that was added to the Switch dock when the OLED model released remains here, as well as an added fan that's supposed to help keep the system cool while under stress. While docked, the Switch 2 can output at up to 4K resolution, with HDR supported as well, provided your connected display supports those resolutions and features. It's an expected but appreciable upgrade, as so many TVs now are 4K, and as the years were going by during the original Switch era, using that system on more modern displays, things were starting to look a bit dire. Lastly, on the hardware side of things, the controllers. Joy-Con 2 are the stars of the show here, and I'd say they're a significant improvement over the OG Joy-Cons. Their increased size helps a lot with that, but there's plenty of other adjustments and additions that make them a far more compelling and enjoyable controller. Or controllers. The physical connection to the console or controller grip is now handled via the power of magnetism, and it leads to a much more sturdy connection over the old rail system on the Switch and Switch OLED. And, it's also just pretty fun to attach and detach them, with a satisfying snap onto the system as the magnets work their magics. Then there's the newly added mouse support, which allows you to flip the Joy-Con 2 down on a flat surface and move them around like you would a computer mouse. The usage of this in actual games is rather limited currently, but I'm expecting it to be quite the game changer when it comes to playing any shooters on the console, and I'm certainly looking forward to giving it a proper test in the Switch 2 edition of Metroid Prime 4, and presumably Splatoon Raiders will support the mouse control scheme as well. Actually, you don't even necessarily need a proper flat surface to utilize the mouse controls, as even something like the arm of a sofa, or even your leg, can work surprisingly well, given how effectively the Joy-Con 2 can glide across surfaces. I think the mouse controls are a really cool addition that also didn't require a massive redesign or some other potentially intrusive gimmick to be added to the general design of the Joy-Con 2, and I find what Nintendo did with these second-gen Joy-Cons to be very impressive. They're still not going to replace a proper Switch Pro controller, but at least there's now a more compelling reason to want to sometimes use the Joy-Con over a Pro controller. So kudos to Nintendo for that. I really only have one gripe with the Joy-Con 2, and it's that there's still no grips, curves, or really anything for your palms to rest in or on the back of the controllers, and I found my hands sometimes going to sleep after extended usage in handheld mode. At least there's already plenty of different third-party grips you can get to alleviate this issue, but if there's one thing I could ask Nintendo to add or change, it's this. Hell, the included controller grip for the Joy-Con 2 is actually pretty comfortable as is, so maybe they could produce some sort of official detachable Joy-Con 2 grip pieces that you can attach to the controllers while using the system in handheld mode. I'm sure I and many others would be very much interested in some sort of official solution from Nintendo, but I suppose for now, we gotta continue to rely on the third parties. Also, gotta give a quick shout out to the Switch 2 Pro controller, as it's an incredibly light, comfortable, and premium feeling gamepad, with the smoothest gliding control sticks I think I've ever experienced on any controller. Original Switch Pro controllers were already great, and can still be used on the Switch 2 thankfully, but if you're looking for an upgrade, or don't already own a Pro controller, I'd suggest picking up a Switch 2 Pro controller. As I just mentioned with the Switch 2 Pro controller, I think my overall feelings on the hardware can be summed up with this. Everything about the Switch 2's hardware is very premium feeling, and most aspects of the design of the system feel like they looked at what the Switch OLED did to the original Switch, and just continued on from there. Sure, you aren't getting as nice of a display as you did going from a Switch or Switch Lite to OLED, but everything else, screen size, resolution, display features, controllers, overall system performance, it's all updated and upgraded in ways that allows for the Switch 2 to deliver a great gaming experience, however and wherever you want to play. So aside from some preference-related quibbles I may have with the panel type selected for the screen, and the lack of any grips for the Joy-Con 2, the Switch 2 hardware is a winner in my book. It may not be as drastic a change in hardware design and features as prior Nintendo console and handheld hardware, but I don't really think that's a bad thing, or what many Switch owners would have wanted. With the original Switch being as popular and successful as it was and still is, a more modest upgrade to what we're all familiar with makes sense. And there's still enough going on with the hardware and software that still lets that Nintendo ingenuity and charm shine through. Speaking of software, you can't have a new video game console without video games to play on it, and Switch 2 has a pretty strong showing right out of the gate. There's of course the brand new, made for Switch 2 games that take advantage of the extra power the new hardware brings, and it can also access a vast majority of original Nintendo Switch software as well, with many of the bigger titles from that original system seeing enhancements and potentially new features and content added to them, but more on that in a moment. Before we really get into the software discussion, I want to briefly touch on third-party releases and ports on Switch 2. I mentioned this back in my Red's Ramblings video on the Switch 2 Nintendo Direct, but I didn't really use the Nintendo Switch for many third-party multi-platform games, and the same remains true for Switch 2. I'd just prefer to play those games on my PC or other consoles when applicable, and because of this, I don't really have much to say on the third-party games that have released already on the Switch 2, as I don't have any personal experience with them, and most likely never will with most of them. That being said, there's already some great third-party games available, with titles like Street Fighter 6, Cyberpunk 2077, and Split Fiction. And with the increased power of the Switch 2, any forthcoming multi-platform games should be less cut back than similar titles were on the original Switch. It may not be what I'm using the Switch 2 for, but for the people who do use it as their main driver for exclusives and multi-platform games alike, I'm glad they'll have access to better versions of those kinds of games, and hopefully more of them than what we saw on original Switch as well. Much like with any Nintendo console, I and many others are here for the exclusives, and on that front, the launch lineup is perhaps a bit thinner than what some people would want, but I think Nintendo went with a quality over quantity mindset here, as I feel they've done with most of their hardware launches in the recent past. Discounting any Switch 2 multi-platform games or re-releases, as far as I can tell, there's really only 3 major, wholly new, truly Switch 2 console exclusives available right from the get-go, with 2 of those 3 exclusives coming from Nintendo themselves, and the other from one Shinen Multimedia. We also just saw the release of another big exclusive for the console, again coming from Nintendo, with Donkey Kong Bonanza. I initially thought I would have had this script done before it released, but since I didn't, I'll be able to briefly talk about it a bit here near the end. For now, we might as well focus in on the true exclusive launch titles, which of course means it's time to talk about Mario Kart World. Finally, after over a decade since the initial release of Mario Kart 8 on Wii U, we get a proper new entry in the series. And it's certainly quite a shakeup from anything we've seen from the series since, I'd say, Mario Kart 7 on 3DS. That game introduced us to so many features we get pretty familiar with over the next 14 years from its initial release, with kart customization, gliding, and underwater racing making their debut in 7, and then getting refined and perfected in 8, alongside the addition of anti-gravity racing too. World does something pretty bold here, and decides to throw most of that away, returning us to a more simple, just get right to it approach to kart racing. No more underwater racing, no more anti-gravity, and no more customizing a kart with a different body, wheels, and glider. This time, you just pick your racer and pre-made kart, and then it's off to the races. To make up for these cuts, World goes big with new features, quite literally, as this game features a fully open world to race through, supporting up to 24 players racing at once, and plenty of new ways to play that take advantage of the new open world structure. Knockout Tour is the star of the show, which sees you racing through predetermined paths along the in-game map, driving to and from different tracks, all while trying to maintain a high placement amongst all the racers in the match. Requirements to stay in the race continue to get stricter and stricter as it goes on, and it's a perfect blend of tense and chaotic moments as you make your way across the world, racing on the different tracks and doing your best to stay ahead of the competition and avoid items and other obstacles as you make your way from one landmark to the next. It really is this perfect mode to showcase everything World does so well. But if you prefer a bit of a more relaxing approach to kart handling, there's also the new free roam mode, which allows you to just take in the sights and drive around at your leisure across a vast map of Mario Kart World. It's not all just for show though, as you can find collectibles known as Peach medallions across all of the major track locations in the world, and scattered throughout the entire map are P-switches, which once activated, present you with a quick little challenge to complete. The rewards for actually completing these challenges and finding those medallions are rather underwhelming, if I'm being honest, as they just net you stickers that you equip to show up on your online profile and kart. It's a little lame they don't unlock something a bit more substantial, like different characters, outfits, or karts, but they're still fun to complete, and they make your driving around in the free roam open world a little less mindless or directionless than it might have otherwise been, had they not been there at all. I have to say though, my favorite aspect of free roam has to be letting me really appreciate the music of Mario Kart World, because oh my god, this is a seriously phenomenal sounding game. It's not like there isn't music present in the other modes, but it can be somewhat hard to listen in and appreciate it when you're dealing with all the different sounds coming from the 23 other racers, items, and other hazards and sound sources. Driving around in free roam really lets you take it in, and it's honestly one of my favorite parts of this game. The sound team pulled no punches at all when it comes to what games to pull music from, as there's so much variety from across not just the Mario Kart series, but the entire Mario franchise as a whole. And every single track, be it new or returning, is masterfully composed, and always a pleasure to listen to. You already heard a bit of the main title theme for the game earlier, but here's just a few other samples of some of the amazing music on offer in this game. So yeah, unsurprisingly, Mario Kart World is phenomenal, and is no doubt a big reason the Switch 2 has already sold over 3.5 million units worldwide. It looks, plays, and sounds absolutely amazing, and is a great game to have right alongside the system at launch. There's already so much to do in it, between grinding out the Grand Prix and knockout tours, competing in online races or battle mode, or just chilling and driving around in free roam, collecting medallions and completing P-Switch missions as you come across them. It all ensures that this is a game I and many others will continue to come back to over the course of the system's life. Plus, given the kind of post-launch support we saw with Mario Kart 8, I think it's safe to say that Mario Kart World will get even bigger and better as time goes on, with new racers, karts, and courses added to the game. It'll certainly be interesting to see how they tackle adding new courses, given the open world makeup and how connected everything is. Perhaps we may see entirely new landmasses to race on in the future? It's hard to know for sure what Nintendo may end up doing, but needless to say, the future of Mario Kart World is exciting to think about, and for now, we've already got quite the expansive and amazing kart racer to enjoy and sink countless amounts of hours into. Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour and Fast Fusion are the other two wholly new exclusives available at launch, and honestly, I don't have as much to say on these games as I do Mario Kart World. Welcome Tour is a complete novelty, and I think I only really bought it due to the new console hype right at launch. There's for sure some cool info that you can learn about the Switch 2 hardware within, alongside some neat demonstrations and demos of what the console can do, but I haven't played it at all since the first launch week, and I can't say I really ever see myself going back to it in any meaningful way. It's a cool little bonus that early adopters can mess around with if they were so inclined, but I think for most people, this one is entirely skippable. And even if you are or were interested in it, watching a playthrough of the game on YouTube or something is probably the way to go at this point, as the further and further we get away from the launch period of the system, the less relevant this game will become. Fast Fusion is much more of an actual game than Welcome Tour, and it's an insanely high quality and impressive game coming from the very small team of developers over at Shinen. I haven't really put too much time into this one, but it's a great looking and feeling futuristic racing game, with some similarities to F-Zero and Wipeout. If you're looking for an inexpensive and quality title to add to your lineup of Switch 2 software, Fast Fusion certainly gets my recommendation, and I'm looking forward to playing more of it soon. We're almost done with the software discussion, but before we finish up, I wanted to quickly touch on the GameCube games that were added to the Switch Online Plus expansion pack exclusively on Switch 2, my experience with backwards compatibility for Switch 1 games on Switch 2, and the newly released Switch 2 exclusive, Donkey Kong Bonanza. So, GameCube games are finally here. It's a bit of a shame that they're only available to Switch 2 owners, but I suppose the emulation for these games required a bit more power that the Switch 2 can easily provide over Switch 1. Plus, file sizes for GameCube games are a good bit larger than any of the prior systems added to Switch Online, so perhaps Nintendo decided to keep them to Switch 2 due to it having much more storage on the system than any of the OG Switch models. The current lineup is pretty small, but there's at least some great, very replayable games on offer, with Soul Calibur 2, F-Zero GX, and the recently added Mario Strikers, plus the more expansive single-player adventure you'll find with Wind Waker on there as well. I've not really spent too much time with any of these games on the Switch 2 myself, but I'm glad that GameCube games are on offer, as there's some seriously amazing games that debuted on that hardware, and are currently stranded on it when it comes to officially playing them. Switch 2 provides for a great avenue for Nintendo to finally re-release some all-time greats, while also allowing for so many new players to experience some classics for the first time ever, and I'm always happy when more people get access to great games. On the backwards compatibility side of things, I've similarly not really tried out too many of my old Switch 1 games on Switch 2, but it's nice to know that most, if not all of my games I collected for the original Switch over the last 8 years will work on the new system, with some of them looking and running better than they ever did on Switch 1. Some games have seen free updates released that increase resolution and performance for many of the big first-party titles from Switch 1, with some of the more notable ones I've personally seen or experienced being Splatoon 3, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, Link's Awakening, and Echoes of Wisdom, to name a few. It's great to see some of the more troubled Switch 1 releases get cleaned up here on Switch 2, and I personally hope that we see some updates come for the Xenoblade games that can increase their resolution and frame rate, an update for Metroid Dread that increases its resolution at the very least, and perhaps even offers a boost from 60 FPS to 120, an update for Metroid Prime Remastered that could increase resolution, performance, and maybe even add in the mouse controls we see available for the Switch 2 version of Metroid Prime 4, and an update or full-on Switch 2 edition of Super Mario Bros. Wonder for the 40-year anniversary of Mario this year that could add in new levels to play, in addition to increasing resolution and performance. There's so many more I could probably go on and on about, but the bottom line is that Switch 2 is a great place to play Switch 1 titles, and many of them are getting upgraded and enhanced for the new console, be it with free updates,
paid Switch 2 edition upgrades that also add new content, or just by virtue of the games previously running with unlocked frame rates on Switch 1, or at higher resolutions than what the Switch 1 could display, with the Switch 2 now allowing those games to hit their respective frame rate and resolution caps with ease, even without a proper update. Backwards compatibility is no doubt a great boon for the Switch 2, offering up a nice way for original Switch owners to re-experience some of their favorite games, and giving new Switch 2 owners who didn't own an original Switch, or any of those games, a way to play the best versions of the biggest games Nintendo released during the original Switch era. I'm glad it's here and working as well as it is, but really, I'm mostly looking forward to the new games that will be releasing for Switch 2. And since I took as long as I did working on this script, a notable new Switch 2 exclusive just dropped with the launch of Donkey Kong Bonanza. I've certainly got some thoughts on it based on what I've played so far. Given how new this title is though, I'm not really going to say too much about it, and I'll also be sure to really only show early areas of the game, as to avoid spoilers. With that being said, man, what a game. Bonanza comes to us courtesy of the same team that gave us Mario Odyssey back during the original Switch's launch year in 2017, and much like what they accomplished with that game, they've managed to deliver pure 3D platforming gold with DK Bonanza. Literally. Much like with the other big Nintendo-developed Switch 2 exclusive, Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza looks wonderful and sounds fantastic, with greatly detailed and colorful environments to platform, explore, and smash through, and an expansive and diverse selection of tunes to enjoy throughout the journey to the planet's core. Most of what I've heard is entirely new music that was lovingly composed for this game right here, but there's some great classic DK tracks from his past adventures in here too, which all combined makes for probably the best DK OST since the original DKC games. DK controls beautifully here, and there's something so weirdly addicting about getting into a new zone of the world and turning it into your own personal destructive playground as you dig, smash, and generally just obliterate anything and everything that stands in your way as you look for gold, fossils, challenge ruins, and of course, those sweet, shiny vanadium gems. I'd never get tired of hearing the little jingle that plays when you find one either. It's so satisfying every time. I never doubted Nintendo would deliver an amazing game with DK Bonanza, but I guess I was unsure if it would hit the same way a 2D or 3D Mario game does. Personally not had too much experience with DK's own games, probably due to the lack of new releases in the series over the years, but the few games I have played of his never really struck me the same way a lot of Nintendo's other platformers have. Thankfully, Bonanza is really resonating with me, and judging by the discussion and reception I've seen for the game online, many others are really enjoying it as well. I think it's safe to say that Nintendo has been successful with expanding the DK franchise further with this game's release, just like what Yoshiaki Koizumi wanted, according to the recently published Ask the Developer Volume 19, which was focused on the development history of Donkey Kong Bonanza. This is a no-brainer for any Switch 2 owner, both current and future, and just talking about it here makes me eager to get back into it. It's addicting, inventive, and never lets up on the fun and whimsy. And much like many of Nintendo's other platformers, it'll probably go down as one of the best 3D platformers ever made. At the very least, I'm confident in saying that it is the best Donkey Kong game ever made. Alright, well, that's probably enough yapping about the Nintendo Switch 2 and any surrounding topics I wanted to talk about for now. There's quite a lot to like with the new system, from its increased power, modern display features, upgraded controllers, excellent backwards compatibility with Switch 1 games, and access to the latest and greatest exclusives from Nintendo themselves. I'd say they're 2 for 2 with Mario Kart World and DK Bonanza, and I'm eager to learn and see more of what they've got cooking for us that we may not know about yet. Even then, we've got a good amount to look forward to already, with some Switch 2 editions from Mario Party Jamboree and Kirby and the Forgotten Land hitting the platform real soon, and some bigger releases coming a bit later this year, with Switch 2 editions of Pokemon Legends ZA and Metroid Prime 4, and Kirby Air Riders being another big Switch 2 exclusive coming sometime in 2025 as well. To sum it up all nice and easy, the Nintendo Switch 2 is just the Nintendo Switch, but better. And I'd highly recommend it to anyone who owns or owned an original Switch console and is looking for an upgrade. And if you haven't yet gotten into the Switch ecosystem, but were thinking of doing so, then yeah, it's really no contest. The Switch 2 is the way to go at this point. You'll be able to play all the great new games releasing, in addition to the vast back catalog of Switch 1 games, which, as we went over earlier, we'll play best on Switch 2 now. You'll get that familiarity of the original Switch, but with smart changes and additions that won't make it a completely foreign experience to what you may already be used to. And at the end of the day, the Switch 2 still offers the same level of versatility and flexibility in how you play that was so vital to the original Switch's popularity and success. I'm very satisfied with the new system so far, and I'm glad Nintendo decided to iterate upon their winning formula they have with the Switch 1, rather than try to reinvent the wheel. The Switch 1 era legitimately brought forth some of their best software output in recent memory, and provided so many amazing experiences you couldn't get anywhere else. And I suspect we'll be seeing that all over again with the Switch 2. Heck, we already are seeing it with the Switch 2, given how well received Mario Kart World and DK Bonanza have been. Nintendo struck gold with the original Switch, and it looks like they're set to do it all over again with Switch 2. But, with all that being said, I think that'll do it for this video. If you made it to the end, I thank you for watching. Your continued viewership and support is greatly appreciated. I hope I was able to entertain, inform, and perhaps interest you in the Switch 2 for yourself, whether you're upgrading from an original Switch or jumping into the Switch ecosystem for the first time. And last, but certainly not least, as always, I'll see you next time.